So far, in the age of the tower builders, we saw how the roots of civilization were laid by a change in hunter-gatherer strategy. As they tried to survive environmental challenges, society was then changed again, as more advanced forms of hunting created a mystical class of people, who appeared to have the power to command nature itself. In this final episode, I wish to examine just how far this culture spread. Did the tower builders lay the foundations for civilization everywhere? Or were they simply one of many steps, as knowledge, rather than people, spread around the world? When discussing ancient towers, it would be impossible to approach the subject while ignoring what is arguably the best-known example in literary history, the Tower of Babel.
And the whole earth was of one language, and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men built. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth.
Now, most academics believe the story may be a myth, utilized to explain the many languages of man, based around the building of a ziggurat. While this interpretation makes some sense, given the scant information, I would like to make an alternative argument. The whole premise of this trilogy has surrounded the change of the human condition, to the way our ancestors not only saw the world, but also the way they began to manipulate nature. Rather than roaming the land, pushed and shoved by every climatic change, they instead built their own world, which obeyed their rules. In such a world, they built their towers so that they could monitor their surroundings. However, not only would this require the joint settlement of multiple groups, linked through family, it would also draw outsiders. Perhaps, the story of Babel Tower is a memory of this time. That at some point in history, a town grew along with its tower. Perhaps, unlike the projection I made of Jericho, moving on to using animals to hunt, this town instead decided to simply make their tower taller. Unfortunately, as the tower and the town around it grew, it attracted more and more people, who may have had multiple origins and so multiple ways of communicating. Eventually, this would have impacted on communication and understanding among the settlers, and perhaps, resulted in a breakup of that community. So, heading further out from the region near Jericho, away from the known ancient towers, what do we find? On a first glance it would appear to be nothing. The towers we see in the likes of Jericho seemingly stop being built. So, does this disprove the theory in this trilogy? Not at all. In fact, if anything, it disproves the mainstream view of them being a temple of some kind. Because, surely, such a structure would continue to spread as the culture spread. Instead, what we find spreading are three different types of buildings: the birdhouse, the high temple, and the granary. So, the control of flying beasts, the supernatural presence this creates around those that have mastered nature, and the level of control over the population this presence provided. After all, the long-term storage of food supplies would have probably been another creation of the hunters, who at this point in history, would most likely be the only people who regularly left their settlements. So only they would have experience and expertise in fields other than farming, and only they would have had the opportunity to see the inventions of faraway communities. This meant that the tallest and most important structures in the settlement were also a constant reminder of who were now the elite in that community. Much in the same way the forum, the temple, and the amphitheater served the same role in Roman settlements. Only the hunter elites had such a mastery over nature and her beasts, that such temples of their dominance could be erected. After generations of hard labor and controlled lifestyle, the farming majority would have looked at the world beyond their borders with fear and wonder. Yet, the hunters and their animal servants would regularly disappear into that strange place, returning with treasures and knowledge. Under such circumstances, it wouldn't take long before those bands of hunters would turn into armies, and the laborers of distant lands appear to them as property, to be taken and abused. Slavery had arrived. Of course, if you were discussing the ancient world, you couldn't do so without looking at arguably the most famous ancient civilization, Egypt. Here too, we see those same patterns that we already find around the Fertile Crescent, right down to the iconography of the gods being a mixture of man and beast. There may even have been a joint origin for these two civilizations. Most have seen the images of gaps within the Great Pyramid, picked up by multiple groups using a mixture of technology. These gaps have quickly been declared hidden chambers within the structure. However, I have an alternative theory. Taking into account the amount of work believed to have gone into building the Great Pyramid, the time it would take, and population levels believed to have existed at the time, I find myself agreeing with the idea that, rather than being a single structure built at a single time, it has actually been added to by different civilizations. So, when I see these gaps, I don't see hidden chambers. I see the gaps that could be left, should someone build a pyramid, over a ziggurat-type structure. Many may think that if something of this nature was achieved, then surely there would be evidence of it everywhere. Yet, examples of this feat exist in much smaller structures, which are so expertly done, that it hasn't been discovered until the structure was taken apart. This house is a 17th century ale house, now available for viewing at the Weald and Downlands Living Museum. Originally in Walderton, it had to be taken apart, transported and reassembled at the museum. During this process, they discovered, much to their amazement, that this wasn't a single building. The entire northern half was in fact a house, built 200 years earlier. Yet these two very different buildings were so well incorporated into each other, that they had to be taken apart for the secret to be discovered. This is not the only such example in this museum, showing this to be a regular practice, right up to the modern era. If such a feat could be achieved with basic two-story constructions, using small stones and timber, how easy would it be to hide one structure inside another, when the building materials are huge stones weighing many tons? Another ancient power would be the semi-mythical Mycenae, of Agamemnon fame. While again, there is no sign of the tower we see in Jericho, there is an area that I find very interesting. In this town of straight lines, we find two circular structures, both located on opposite sides of the famous Lion's Gate into the heart of the citadel. These are grave circles, as the name suggests, they are graveyards. Yet only a small number of the elite are buried here. Geographically, these are the only two spots on the hill where it would have been possible to build structures like the watchtowers. Although just a theory with no supporting evidence, I cannot help but to wonder if towers were once constructed here. That like in the Fertile Crescent, they became deified along with the hunters that used them. Perhaps the towers were eventually removed, but the ground they stood upon remained a religious icon, leading to the descendants of those first hunter kings to be buried there. The next stop I want to make on this journey is a little island in the Mediterranean Sea, called Sardinia. Here, we find towers called nuraghe, which look very familiar. These examples were actually built thousands of years later, with an interior that is vastly different. However, the exterior dimensions of many of these towers are very similar to the older variety, and, just like with the towers of the Near East, there is no definitive conclusion to what function these towers served. Personally, I would say that at this point, the towers were probably more a ceremonial structure, built for cultural rather than functional purposes. As for the vast differences in dates and methods between the watchtower of Jericho and the nuraghe, I would make 2 points. Firstly, we have no idea if these structures were built to replace earlier versions. Secondly, we need to take into account how long it would take such a culture to spread to such a remote island. So, do we see signs of this culture of the tower builders anywhere else? In truth, no. We see the same kind of iconography, with man and beast combined, and we have an endless number of strange objects, which could be argued are the remains of towers or other large structures. However, if I was to be impartial in my observations, I could not claim to see anything linking later structures to the towers of the Fertile Crescent. I wouldn't have expected to see the same structures further afield and throughout time. A civilization never lasts forever, and the age and size of a civilization can be shaped by the challenges it's presented with, such as geography, distribution of competing civilizations and, of course, the technological abilities of said civilization. So, going on the era and a lack of evidence for advanced technology, I probably would expect the tower builders' civilization in its original form to barely spread beyond the Near East, and to be all but forgotten after a couple of thousand years. So, does this mean this society was not the driving force behind the establishment of settled civilization around the world? No, not at all. After all, the group often referred to as Indo-European, due to their language group, accredited with changing the course of human civilization everywhere from Ireland to India, around 7,000 years ago, and that civilization originated in a small area north of the Black Sea. If this did happen, it wasn't through a mass migration or invasion of that entire region. It was accomplished by the slow spreading of ideas, and ideas spread far quicker and easier than a people. Those who built the towers on Sardinia probably had no connection at all to the people of Jericho 8,000 years earlier. However, that doesn't mean that the ideas of priest-like hunter leadership and everything associated with that didn't reach the people of a small Mediterranean island. Another potential sign that the tower builders didn't physically influence the world is the Nub Phenomenon. These strange protrusions in stone blocks used for construction are seen in sites around the world, including cities in Egypt, the Maya, and India. Yet, it isn't found in any of the cities that can be linked directly to the tower builders. So the tower builders and the nub carvers are not the same people. Who were the nub carvers? Sorry folks, but, even if I did have a ready answer to that question, that is a whole different video. However, if you want to learn more about the Nub Phenomenon, please visit these channels. They are the experts on nubs and have more knowledge than I'll ever have on the subject. Thank you for listening to the Age of the Tower Builders trilogy. Please leave a like and a comment. I'd really appreciate it. Take care folks, and I'll see you in the next video.